Can you see it?
Yep, looks great.
Okay.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. I'm Heather Campbell. I'm the Curator of Museum Programs for the University of Richmond Museums. And I'm very pleased to welcome you to tonight's program titled Confidence, Creativity, and Contemplation, a virtual panel with former student fellows in the University Museums. Tonight's program is presented in conjunction with the exhibition 2 Decades, celebrating the 20th anniversary of the Joel and Lila Harnett Print Study Center. We are also celebrating 20 years of our Harnett Summer Research Fellowship Program. Just some items of business before I introduce our panel moderator. During the program, please, audience, submit any questions you may have for our panelists in the Q&A section at the bottom of your screen. Once we have finished our prepared questions and discussion, we will leave time for audience questions at the very end of the program. We are recording the program, so it will be available probably later this week on our website at museums.richmond.edu if you wish to watch it again or you want to share it with someone who may have missed it. Also, please keep checking our website for updates on our COVID-19 protocols on campus. Once the campus is following the green protocol, we will be able to allow the general public to come back to the museums and to have full access to programs and exhibitions once again. Now I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for tonight's panel discussion. Hadley Beckstrand is an art history major who is currently working in the University Museums as a curatorial assistant for the academic year. Hadley was our 2021 Harnett Summer Research Fellow, and she was the curator of the 2 Decades exhibition. She was also curator of another exhibition opening this week called Arcadian Idols, Landscape Masterpieces of 19th Century European and American Printmaking. I will now turn the program over to Hadley, who will introduce our panelists and officially begin the discussion.
Thank you, Heather. Today we are fortunate to talk with Carmen Hermo, Morgan Mitchell, and Kate Wiley, 3 of the past Harnett Fellows. Carmen Hermo was the 2006 Harnett Fellow, and she joined the Brooklyn Museum's Elizabeth A. Sackler Center for Feminist Arts curatorial team as assistant curator in June 2016, and was appointed associate curator in 2018. She has curated a variety of shows, including Camila Janan Rashid, Are We Reading Closely, Roots of the Dinner Party, History in the Making, and among others. She likewise organized the Brooklyn's presentation of Andy Warhol, Revelation, in 2021, and co-organized those of Radical Women, Latin American Art, 1960 to 1985, and Marilyn Minter, Pretty/Dirty, 2016 to 2017. Carmen works to support and build the collection by serving on the Council for Feminist Art and Young Leadership Council patron groups. Previously, Carmen was an assistant curator and curatorial assistant for collections at the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum. She has previously worked with the collections of the Whitney Museum of American Art and the Museum of Modern Art. Her curatorial projects have also appeared in the Hirshhorn Museum and the Air Gallery. Carmen received her BA in Art History and English from the University of Richmond and her Master's in Art History from Hunter College. Next, we have Morgan Mitchell, the 2018 Harnett Fellow, who is currently a second-year master's student at the University of Texas at Austin, where she is researching contemporary African diaspora art. She is also currently a curatorial assistant and program coordinator at Fluent Collaborative, an experimental exhibition space in Austin, Texas. After the completion of her master's degree, she plans to pursue a full-time opportunity in contemporary art museums or galleries. And then Kate Wiley was the 2019 Harnett Fellow, who co-curated 2 exhibitions, Satire and Social Criticism prints by William Hogarth from the collection, and The Age of Hogarth and Piracini, Masterpieces of the 18th Century. As part of the Hogarth exhibition, Kate developed an interactive Google Slides gallery feature, which allowed visitors to select minute details of the prints they saw before them and read about their topical significance, important context, which otherwise would have been lost on the audience. She was then able to present on this innovative use of Google platform at the Southeastern Museums Conference. After graduating, Kate returned to her home state of Iowa and is now working at Stephen Vale Fine Arts Gallery in Des Moines. So today we'll ask some questions to the panelists, and we can start with an open-ended question to Kate, Morgan, and Carmo of what was your major in college? So we can start with Kate.
I was an art history major and an archaeology minor. And I think that combination was very important to me because the archaeology classes, I think, balanced the kind of Western heavy art history survey courses. And on top of it, I got to know both the archaeology professor, Elizabeth Bond, and then the art history professors.
I was just an art history major, and I actually really enjoyed just having one area of study because I feel like it gave me a lot of time to focus on what I really wanted to do, which was art history. So.
Yeah, and when I came to UR, I did not know I would eventually go on to be a curator. I thought I was going to be a journalist. That was kind of my dream at the time. And so I was doing a major in English and ended up double majoring with art history once kind of the professors, especially Dr. Pevney, who's no longer there, but she was kind of my 101 professor who was like, wait a second, you should think about this. And yeah, so very grateful. But it's a good combo too. You know, it's like the writing is definitely a part of art history. So I think they work well together.
Lovely. So we clearly have a humanities-based group here. All right, so Carmen, how would you describe your curatorial process that you followed and developed for the Harnett Summer Fellow exhibition? And how did it extend into your current curatorial efforts?
Yeah, well, when I was there, it was a really amazing summer. As you mentioned, there were sort of 2 exhibitions happening, and it was really exciting to be kind of taking the approach of like a celebratory kind of survey of the collection, of sort of like getting a little bit of everything and sort of maybe having some say in terms of like what my favorites were. Like you threw up the Goya, which is always a favorite of mine, and kind of seeing how, you know, I was learning a lot. You know, I look back on that summer and think so much about like switching gears, like that feeling of like, okay, I spent the morning cataloging prints. I remember a lot of J.J. Lanke's prints. And then I spent the afternoon maybe doing a little bit of research for the wall label, and then switched gears and, you know, maybe we worked on the press release. And I just remember a very kind of collaborative and guiding experience. And I tried to kind of like do that also in my curatorial work when I work with other folks who are emerging or new to the museum. Like I try to be very kind of like open and explicative, like with what's going on, because so many times museums are not as organized as a Lila Harnett Center, Joel Lila Harnett Center. And so there might not be like a guide or somebody there with you all the time. So kind of I think about like, yeah, ways to make the work clear so that it's not like, okay, go do a checklist, but like, what goes into making a checklist? Like think about like, what would be the highlights? What would fill out the highlights? What are the crowd pleasers and what are the deep dives, and sort of break things down, because I do remember just that feeling of like, you know, being in the gallery, being in the research space, like spending time in the flat files, and then every once in a while having this moment of like, whoa, all this is going to turn into a show that people are going to come see. And like, I still think about that magic a lot. And yeah, as I like entered my career in the museum field, like my first paying like museum job that was like, I am a salaried staff member, was at MoMA. And that was, you know, I remember in that interview too, that they were very much looking at all the things I had done at the Harnett museums and were saying, oh, actually, like you do have TMS experience and you do have checklist experience and you do have writing experience. And so it really is that total experience. Yeah, so life-changing.
I think it might have been after your year, Carmen, but I was presented with a week-by-week breakdown. And it was so interesting. It was very helpful but it was not how I was conceptualizing the exhibit. So my first week, I had devoured everything that I could find about William Hogarth. And then I had to think of it in terms of how it was presented in the gallery. So I think it was actually my second weekly meeting with Richard Wiley, the director of Euro Museums. And I sat down and I said, could we take this into the gallery? I want to propose a layout, which I think was on the list for the week 10. And I think it was just, it helped me visualize. I think I was able to propose the gallery feature there. So I think it was so nice that they had provided me with a list of things that needed to be done, but the Your Museums wasn't, they allowed me to think in the way that I was, processing creating something. And I think that was so valuable to see the options and then to choose what worked best for me. And I think that taught me a lot about how I approach exhibitions in general. To be able to have that like agency in my approach was really, really important.
Yeah, Kate, I definitely agree with that. I felt like, we get a timeline, and what's wonderful about the fellowship is that it's not quite fixed. I had the opportunity to talk to so many different people, and I appreciated the collaborative nature of the curatorial process, because now, as I am a curatorial assistant part-time, it's so nice to immediately think who is involved and to work that way, instead of creating something and envisioning it with just my perspective and then having to figure out how to work with other people. It was really important to learn how to consider so many different factors from the beginning, so that later on down the line there isn't so much chaos and confusion. So it's definitely really helpful for that to have been the process from the jump, and to have had the freedom to skip around a couple of steps if need be, but always be able to circle back to the schedule that was set for us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree. And kind of going off of the collaborative nature aspect Morgan touched on, especially with this exhibition that I kind of helped curate. I got to talk to so many people, so many fellows, all of you guys, about all of your experiences. And I got to talk to all the people who work at the museums and learn about their experiences in the artistic world and how they, have gotten on these paths. And you really do learn about all the facets of museum work, from labels to research to every single part of it. And so this is kind of a tangent on this. What was your favorite part of your exhibition? What was something that stood out to you while working on your exhibition? It could be a piece, it could be anything really. And we can start with Kate.
Oh, my favorite part, I frequently refer to the research that I did with one of the private collectors at the VMFA as the most invigorating research I've ever done. I felt like I was like in a and being able to be in the space of the Virginia Fine Arts Museum with Jenny Runnels and Frank Razor was just amazing. You really feel like you're in the art world, like you're a part of it. So I was working on identifying unidentified or uncatalogued, I guess, rather, pieces of artwork in a private collection. And so I would scroll through, the museum databases, and I would put together checklists essentially. But that was so fun. And now that's what I'm doing at the gallery that I'm working at. So I have all this knowledge that I have, and so I can clarify very specific like ways and standardized practices that I can bring and kind of help, sort things out there. That was my favorite part.
I feel like mine was longer ago now. So, but I'll never forget that feeling of like, yeah, just kind of seeing that space of sort of like, I'm somebody who, still to this day, like you'll catch me like, oh, I'm bad at math, and like saying, like putting myself down, like I don't have that spatial brain, but like because I work with people who have installed exhibitions and we did it together, like just actually literally gazing upon this unique story that's being told in that way for that show with those artworks and those like artists and ideas, like, and kind of just like that feeling of like, wow, this is something that like we kind of did together, and it could be so different if we had chosen these other 4 prints instead of these, and for me, I was literally going on to write my thesis about Goya and like his performance of the self and court portraits, and to literally be able to work with, like, touch when you're a cataloger. Like, people don't really get that experience of being so close to an artwork that you can touch it and that you are actually qualified and you have washed your hands and you can touch it. You're not wearing nail polish. And like just that feeling of being able to be up close and personal in the print center and like actually see the way Goya made that print without glass, without your own reflection kind of getting in the way. But that was such a special, special moment for sure, was to kind of like take that particular print, but the whole show, the whole checklist really from like those more, what felt like private moments between you and the artwork into the space of like, oh my God, I installed this, like come by for my tour, hear me talk about it. And then it just kind of hangs there, in the space, even in the closed hours. Like it's kind of a beautiful, just that feeling of it all coming together.
I definitely echo that feeling. I think for me, what was really exciting was to work with the collectors at the VMFA and to sort of, at the time when I went into the exhibition and the planning of all of it, I really didn't know how anything was going to come together or be presented. There was a massive group of prints to pull from. And what was exciting is to hear other people's thought process and to listen to, like Frank Grazer and Richard Waller sort of talk about the best way to present material that I was unfamiliar with at the time. And we ended up, deciding on a sort of more discursive exhibition as opposed to something that was really strictly narrative. It was about 14th century printmaking. 16th century printmaking. And that's such a wide topic. And so I liked that we were able to narrow it down and, decide on a way to present that provides a little something for everybody. So if you're interested in animals, there's that. If you're interested in religion, there's a section for that. And that really helps me inform a lot of the research I do now in grad school. I realized I don't always have to put together a coherent story with a beginning, middle, and end, although at times that's useful, but at times it's been really helpful to know that I don't have to do that and the information will still come across.
Yeah, I think my favorite part, along echoing both Kate and Morgan, was that with working with the collector and having that tangible, experience with the prints and being able to actually touch and work with these prints that were created in the 1800s and are still continuing to impact us even now. I think that was kind of the coolest part, having that connection to the past and then the present. And that fascinated me. And then for my other question, was there an emotional feeling or memory that stood out to you during your time as a fellow or in the exhibition overall? It's kind of similar, but not. And we can start with Morgan.
Thank you. That's a good question. I would say that what stood out to me, I guess, as an emotional moment was when the Printed World exhibition actually opened. And I remember it was so nice seeing, I'd kind of forgotten how many people were incorporated in that process of putting that exhibition together, and also how much of a local community there is around printmaking, like in the Richmond area. And so it was really emotional for me. I got there like 2 minutes later than I said I would. And I walked in and it was so exciting to see, the lobby right there in the Maudlin Center was full. And it was exciting to see someone I had worked with at the VMFA previously. My family was there, my friends were there. And it was so nice to have all of that support in one room. I remember I couldn't even walk from one print to the next, like through the crowd. There were so many people there. And it was so nice to feel so supported. And I remember thinking, if I can speak in front of this many people, I can do this work. It was a really empowering moment to know that I can do it and that I can communicate effectively and that everybody at University of Richmond and University of Richmond Museums was rooting for me. So that really stands out.
I feel like I already did my emotional relay of that feeling of just like being wowed by it actually being in a space and not just like a really good essay, but actually like singing in that space. And then, for me too, it's been amazing because I guess it was 2 years ago now, although like the COVID year is a little bit confusing. But I was like invited back to be a juror on the, print biennial for the biennial and for the museum. And that was super amazing, like to kind of be in the auditorium where I saw curators and artists speak and be the one giving the lecture like so many years later. And it was, I remember like very focused on an exhibition I had done that year. Yes, it must have been 2019. Nobody Promised You Tomorrow, Art 50 Years After Stonewall at the Brooklyn Museum, which was a group show that, like you were saying, we're gonna like organize thematically, lots of connective tissue there, but I really was relating to what you were saying about like something for everyone, kind of, yeah, it was just really, really powerful and special, like definitely personal achievement to be able to kind of like come full circle and be invited back like at that capacity, and yeah, and to engage with like the amazing printmakers of Virginia. Like you said, like it's an amazing community of artists.
I agree. I think I felt kind of surrounded by such a supportive community throughout. And I also, I guess myself, I felt it was my first job, internship, fellowship in the arts. And it was the first time that I was producing something like that, like something that I was so passionate about. And so I felt, I think, more determined than I ever had in my entire life. It felt like I was sitting in the thesis room that Hadley's in right now, and I had essentially an office. I spread out in there, was in there all the time. And it was just, it was that year, that summer, that year that I think I was spending so much time with the people at UR museums, and then also the art history department, and also the people at the BMFA. And I felt like I had a community, and I felt finally, I think, rooted in Richmond because of this opportunity. And I think that's why I get so excited to go back to Richmond. That's why I get so excited to see everyone that I worked with, because that opportunity, they trusted me, they helped me, I got to work with them. And so I think just the connections that I made, it's just happiness is what I think I feel, just community.
Yeah, when I was talking with other fellows about that emotional element, when they think back to their exhibition, a lot of people said they felt very safe and the environment was very warm, and I couldn't agree more. I started working at the museums freshman year of college, and I was really homesick, and working at the museums and having all these people that were really kind and helpful and supportive really aided in me feeling welcome at the school and in a different state altogether. But I completely agree with that. How did the fellowship influence other things in your life and career that you didn't expect? We can go with Morgan again.
Sure. I feel like everything I've done so far comes back to the Harnett Fellowship, to be honest, because it was such a great foundation for like every job you could possibly have in a museum, I feel like. So the summer following my Harnett Fellowship, I interned at the Smithsonian African American History and Culture Museum she's now the chief curator, but at the time she was the curator of visual art. And I remember when I did my interview with her, I thought it was an interview, but she had already decided to select me for the internship. And she mentioned how impressed she was at all of the sort of responsibilities I was able to carry out and to open to exhibitions with the fellowship. And she told me that it set my application so far above all of the others. And at a museum like the Smithsonian, I was so excited to hear that, because it felt, being in the Harnett Fellowship and working with University of Richmond feels like such a small, loving community that I kind of didn't know what would happen when I stepped out of it. And it was so nice to know that although I felt like it was in a small community, the work I was doing is so relevant to what other people are doing, and that, I was supported. I was so supported, and because of that, I can move on to like different types of institutions. So I had no idea, how impressive it was. I was just doing it. It was just fun. And everything I've done with museums or galleries after that, I think back to when I learned how to use TMS, and when I was walking through thinking about frames, and all of these small little things that come back. And so everything has come full circle back to the fellowship, and I'm really appreciative of it because of that.
I think my answer relates to my last answer. This fellowship felt like my first time really working on a team and being a trusted member of a team. And I think it was the first time that I felt like an adult with responsibilities. And I think it was also the first time that I trusted adults to be my friend and to like spend time with me. And by the end of the internship, I would drop in on Richard at his office and just chat. And those are some of my favorite memories from senior year. Those are just having those relationships. I think I'd always been someone that was timid around my professors. I didn't want to waste their time. I didn't want to ask too many questions about their personal life. And I think this internship allowed me to see myself as an adult a little bit more, and also just be less scared of people that are older than me for thinking that I'll just look like a kid. I don't know.
That is so wise and so on point. I feel like that's such an interesting like way to think about how we were like part of this amazing team. And yeah, Morgan, what you said too about it being a foundation is like, yeah, that's absolutely what I experienced. Like TMS, for those of you blessed enough to not know what the museum system is, it's a very intense database that has its own entire universe of rules and regulations and way to click and not click. And yeah, it's definitely a skill and it's a very important one. Yes, I had a very similar experience. Again, like I said, I was in this interview for MoMA for a fellowship there, paid fellowship, a year-long fellowship. And the interviewer, I remember she was like pointing at that part of my resume and was like, wow, like this is an incredible skill set. And she was kind of like, this is exactly what we're looking for. And I, like you kind of were talking about too, Kate, like kind of this feeling of maybe like the fish out of water. I think the art world kind of breeds that experience of like isolation or feeling left out of something, although it can also be really embracing and awesome. But yeah, I remember then like going into the fellowship and like a lot of the other fellows, like I was kind of like, whoa, okay, these are people who have their masters, who like have been working at a gallery for several years. And I think I initially felt a little bit like shaken of like, oh, okay. But then it's like as the work went on and realizing like, okay, I am excelling here and I do know how to research and I do know how to write and I do know how to do these things. And like, I know the TMS secrets. So I think that like, yeah, maybe it's like a combination of both those answers. Like, yeah, checking myself against some of those, yeah, just natural sort of self-doubt moments that you have. You know, it's a competitive field. So it's just really amazing to kind of feel like your ground is very solid, you know, and that you can like move forward from that space. And, you know, for me, being in the New York art world has been amazing because Lila Harnett herself is a huge influence on the Art Table network of like women curators, gallerists, artists, just a community of women in the arts supporting each other. And I think, yes, that kind of also adds to that legacy when I look back on what's now quite a long time ago. And I'm like, okay, but you know, Lila sort of still continues to have an influence on the way like the art world is happening in New York and women are kind of supporting each other. I can't help but notice that all of us on this panel right now are women as well. So yeah, I think it's really nice to kind of feel that support even though I'm long gone.
Lovely, those answers were great. So Carmen, you have clearly worked at a number of esteemed museums. How would you describe working at a smaller museum such as the University of Richmond versus those larger institutions, or for both Morgan and Kate working at galleries? How would you describe that kind of difference and working in those spaces?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like, it's completely different in some ways because you actually like, yeah, you are part of, like if you took 2 weeks off, like things would slow down. You know what I mean? Like it is sort of a kind of amazing way to be working as one, where it's like everybody kind of has their role, but does so much more than that. Because I think, you know, in some of my experiences, that like, you know, a MoMA, quite a large museum where it seems like they're very well staffed, you know, they have lots of great initiatives, you know, from like temporary to ongoing work, and, you know, there'll be curatorial assistants for just an exhibition. And that, you know, imagine like that kind of level of focus. But I think why, you know, the fellowship was so sustaining and why I continue to sort of be interested in like public art museums is just because of that feeling of kind of like, not necessarily jack of all trades, but like, yeah, I mean, like you read my resume, you know, it's like, I'm a feminist art curator and I'm about to open a show on Andy Warhol. Like, not super feminist topic, but because the Brooklyn Museum is maybe smaller than these other places, there's a little bit more of like, hey, you're available and you'll have an interesting take on this. It's not like we have a roster of 100 curators to choose from. And so I think maybe the Brooklyn Museum is that sweet spot between like the mega museum and like the more intimate like university museum. And I think what like I loved about it too was sort of just being in like a literal arts center. And I always remember too like being invited to go to a theater production or like listen in on a rehearsal of something, and like to kind of have this feeling of like it's all happening there. And there was sort of like a little cross section of lots of different mediums and ways of expressing creativity. And I kind of felt like the museum was like a part of that, but also sort of like encouraging, like, oh hey, like be sure to check this out on your way before you like go to the library or whatever, like check this out. Because I think like there is a way that there are. And I went on then to like, when I was at the Whitney, for example, I was a cataloger for 2 years of works on paper. So like, it was a painting, I couldn't look at it, it was sculpture, I couldn't look at it. Like, and that was like my laser focus. And I feel like in my career, I've had an interesting balance of that, like specialization and then generalist. And I think, there's an interesting kind of trend I see with a lot of like contemporary curators where like you have your passions, you have your specialty, but the ways that institutions work today, where there's kind of so many different audiences coming to bear, coming to enjoy art, to be challenged. Some people just want to have fun. So there's sort of like all these different kind of tones and possibilities. And like, I love that kind of experience. And I feel like that comes from that feeling of like being a little bit more flexible because you're on a team and maybe that's not what you expect to do today, but that's what you're doing. Or, maybe you thought you were going to be able to dive deeper into this other thing, but then you chased this rabbit hole and then you find yourself over there and like, that was okay. So I found that kind of like very open and flexible.
I think I decided that I would like to work on a small team at University of Richmond. Actually, I really liked the jack of all trades feeling, and at the gallery too, I can do cataloging, and then I can do emails, and then I can reach out to artists. I like that diversity in the activities that I'm doing. I think I found it when I was at the fellowship, and then I think I decided that that's what I liked to do.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. It's very nice to be on a small team and to know that like you can reach out and someone will help you immediately, that everyone is there and there's a little bit more like it cultivates a better, I feel like working or rather easier to navigate working environment. Going from the Harnett Fellowship to the Smithsonian was such a culture shock because all of a sudden everybody I needed to get in touch with had like 4 assistants and 3 curatorial assistants. And, it was so much harder to get in touch with people, even for such small things. Whereas working in a smaller gallery or university museum, everyone you need is right in front of you or in the office next to you. And I'll say now working at a small, sort of experimental art gallery, I really value having a small staff and working at a smaller institution, because what that means is that we can work really, really closely with our audience. And we can be so specific about the work we present because our audience is coming in with, we know who they are and we can work with them. And it's not quite the shock of a public institution where you create an exhibition and you have no idea if everyone will hate it or not. So it's really nice that I got to start in such a small staff. And now that I'm working in a small staff, I'm realizing just how special of an experience that is. And like you both mentioned, you become a jack of all trades, and that's useful for whatever, we decide to go on to do.
And oftentimes when I interviewed a lot of the fellows who were working in galleries or smaller museums, they talked about how with smaller museums, you can get an exhibition. It's more fast paced, like the actual exhibition comes out faster as opposed to those big institutions that it takes several years to have the exhibition, come out. So that's also another interesting viewpoint. So another question for Carmen. As a curator, what are some challenges or changes that you are seeing in your path at the moment, and what keeps you interested in what you are doing? And then also for Kate and Morgan, when you guys were curating your shows, because it was fairly recently, what were some challenges that you saw then and then also you're seeing now?
Yeah, I think there's plenty of challenges. Like Morgan also alluded to them by, mentioning that like you never know how an exhibition is going to hit. I think I've been so lucky and have worked really hard on numerous different kinds of exhibitions, from like small projects to collection shows to this big Warhol show, which is like I'm curating it for the Brooklyn venue, a show that already existed, curated by Jose Carlos Diaz. And so there's kind of challenges in that too, of like, okay, how do I find my voice, right? Like I'm obviously not going to be able to read every book about Andy Warhol, and there's just so many of them, and kind of also checking myself against some of those kind of like assumptions about like, yeah, okay, I'm not a Warhol expert. I've done my due diligence. And actually my perspective and what makes it kind of sharp and interesting comes from outside of that, and not being an expert. And I think that's something that like I see that excites me about like the museum field. We know it's being questioned a lot lately, as it should be. It's also cyclical, like in the 60s and the 90s. And again, today we're kind of asking the same questions about representation, about power, about who funds things, about whose voices are missing. And I think those are really powerful questions to constantly be asking. But I also do see change, like I will say too, when I was doing other things that were not this fellowship coming up in the museum world, like I worked several unpaid internships, and I'm really happy that that's kind of like, especially at large museums where they do have funds, like is like no longer okay, and that's becoming an industry standard. And it's kind of been interesting to see that happen, rather quickly in the world of museums. But of course, like not soon enough for the people who missed that opportunity because they could not take an unpaid job, and I think that it's been really exciting and heartening to also see the changes that come about from just like people kind of unifying their power. So for instance, like the Brooklyn Museum just added a second union for a lot of people who were not unionized, which is like very heavily comprised of like our front of house staff, who of course like kept the museum running and welcomed visitors when I was working from home safely and comfortably. And also curators and conservators and lots of other staff members who, didn't quite fit into the existing union and are not leadership, and actually being able to talk to each other and say, hey, we're having the same issue in my department. Like, how can we build power and move through this together? I think that that's a really exciting change that I see, just kind of people getting to know each other outside of like your department and your quadrant and your specialty and your people that you eat lunch with, if you will. So that's like very, very encouraging. And I think that also keeps me interested in what I'm doing, but I also, on the good days, I really am like, damn, this job is amazing. Like I get to literally work with artists who are brilliant. And, October 1st, I opened a show with Basira Khan, who's an incredible Brooklyn-based artist born in Texas. And that show included 4 new projects that the museum helped, fund and make possible through the production costs. Of course, it was all the artist brilliance that made it all possible. But to actually see, like for me, it's really valuable to see a museum like the Brooklyn Museum. We're coming up on our 200th year anniversary, not too far away. And to see an emerging artist kind of get that level of support and really see kind of a space transformed, and see museums, not just show emerging artists, but also make new work possible that then that artist can continue to show elsewhere, or, sell to a collector or sell to other museums, and sort of be able to contribute in that way. Like that keeps me interested, is like that feeling of, helping a really powerful voice be heard by more people, helping them kind of get their work through all of these different audiences and possibilities that come from an exhibition, right? Because the exhibition's on the wall, but then you have the educational programs, like for various ages, for various like ability levels, and you have the public programs that like enliven it in different ways. And there's just so much that comes out of an exhibition. And sometimes there's even a catalog and a publication, so it lives on in that way too. So I think that's, that kind of always just like keeps me going, gets me inspired, is that like possibility of what these exhibitions, bring.
Yeah, those are all really great points. I'll say that in terms of challenge I see right now, I've actually been thinking a lot about how the pandemic really called attention to the fact that the art world hasn't really accounted for situations where the audience isn't present. And that physicality of that presence is so, so important in both the viewing and the learning experience. So like from the curatorial side and from the public programming side. And so I found that like a lot of different galleries were trying different ways of making virtual exhibitions, like everything from like just an image slideshow to like podcast type narrative walkthrough situations. And so I think that like museums and galleries having to, translate all of their work online is great for accessibility, but really hard, like I said, for an industry that doesn't really have a standard operating procedure for that. And so like the challenge I foresee is that I'll be expected to sort of have like a engineering virtual reality sort of fluency that is not embedded in art history curriculum. There's no classes I can take right now towards my master's degree in STEM, like in tech and engineering or anything like that I could translate then. So the challenge I foresee is that I'll have to learn that on my own. Right now at my gallery, we have an artist who wants to ensure that her work is accessible to her family in Cuba. And so we're making sure we have a virtual reality component, but I have no idea what that is. So I've been, kind of sort of teaching myself along the way, but that's a challenge. And I think we'll continue to go through that before it gets a little bit more standardized. But what keeps me motivated is definitely like, the capacity for that art has for community formation, but also community healing. I was just at the Brooklyn Museum actually this past weekend and saw the, what's the name of the exhibition? Slipstream down on the first floor. And there is a work in the exhibition. I forget the name of it, but it's a horse. It's a statue of a horse. And the panel invites people to sort of add little remnants of their life. So it's kind of, this thing everybody who walks in the museum can add to. And I think that participatory element, like not to sound really corny, but like that's, so important to me. And that's exactly the kind of work I hope to bring to the public. Because I think that's so healing after so many people have been isolated for so long. And I will say, I also saw the Dirty South exhibit at the VMFA that just closed. And it was such a fantastic exhibit. My dad's side of the family is from the South. And it made me so happy to see my lived experience at a major museum like that, because I hadn't really seen any, exhibits that focused on contemporary Southern artists in that way. And so, in thinking about community formation and community healing, that was a very wonderful experience to me, and it really inspired me to put together exhibitions like that in the future if I have the capacity to.
Yeah, I think being able, kind of like what you were saying with the horse and, kind of inserting life experiences into that. I think that art often seems kind of like it's on a pedestal and, it's only there to be admired, and having art that you can actually like insert yourself into and seeing yourself in whatever, you're viewing is a really important part of museums and exhibitions. And lastly, what advice do you all have for upcoming and future summer fellows? And we can start with Kate.
My summer of my fellowship was the summer that I was focusing a lot on my self-talk, and I had a post-it note next to my, my dresser, whatever, that was kind of reminding me that I get to do this, that I get to do everything. I think at some points I was so worried because it felt like I needed to be good at it. I needed to do a really good job, but I had so many support systems and so many people that were helping me that I think that they wouldn't have let me fail. It was so safe, but I was putting so much pressure on myself that was just harmful to, the end product in my opinion. It was just not helpful to me. So I think I was focusing so much on the opportunity. You can do so much, and the people there will help you accomplish anything that you can set your mind to. So I think that my advice would be to use the opportunity use as much as you can, do as much as you can, be, as wild with your ideas as you can, maybe, and just see what you can do while it's so safe and while it's so fun and communal.
Go ahead, Morgan, sorry.
I was just going to say that I wholeheartedly agree. I think the fellowship is such a great opportunity also to expand your network. And not only are you supported by University of Richmond museums, like the staff and, you know, the audience that the museum has, but you're also supported by all of your other fellows, all of the Richmond alum, like that you meet on your trip that we all go on. And so the support network is so much further and wider than what we can see. And I think that's really important. Like, I think that helped me not feel scared to possibly one day enter the New York art world, which seems very intimidating, you know, from a gal from Virginia. But that really helped me feel like there is a support network there. If I can't see them, somebody knows who they are, and that you're always sort of in touch. And so to remember that, like Kate was saying, you can stretch your ideas out as far as you can possibly go beyond your wildest dreams, and you can always fall back on your support network. So to just be brave and try it out, and you won't fail.
Yeah, that's such beautiful advice. I like both of them, really spot on. I think like all three of you probably have heard the advice I give, but like, and it is like my quote at this point, but it's still so real, because when you go and like as fellows, as future art people, as current art people, and you go into these spaces and you see everyone talking to each other, you know, in previous days, kissing each other on the cheek, hugging each other, seeming like they haven't seen, like long lost cousins hugging at last. And a lot of times it can just feel so isolating. And my advice is like, please know that those people don't actually know each other. They probably don't even remember each other's names. Because now that I'm in this art world, I find myself often sort of like, oh yes, of course we met. Like, but the appearance from the outside is like an unflappable group of absolute art world besties that you'll never, ever be able to like step to. But in reality, actually, like as you attend panels, as you get to know the artists, as you kind of like find your way within that craziness, you start to realize, oh wait, like there actually is a porous space here, like for new people to enter, for us to create our own little nodules in our world too. So that's kind of the advice I give, because yeah, it's an intimidating thing. And yeah, to sort of like, yeah, know that secret trick that everybody seems like their best friend, but they're really not.
Yeah, I think definitely kind of what you guys all said. I mean, at least for me, when I looked at the list of fellows I'd have to contact, I remember seeing all these curators and all these people that were really, you know, prominent figures. And I was like, I'm a little like kid. I can't like contact them. This was nerve-wracking. And, you know, it's really easy to just be like, they're also esteemed. They're also cool. How can I be one of them? And so like realizing they were in my shoes at some point, they went through all of this, is kind of key. And, you know, that's kind of freeing, I think, in a lot of ways. And also that network is essential. I mean, getting to talk to all of the other people that have had this position really does expand that network, and they're all so lovely and wonderful. So yeah, I agree with all your points, and those are all the questions I have for now. So I think we're going to welcome Heather back and have some Q&A from those watching at home.
Okay, so we have a question. The question is, you mentioned the collaborative nature between the museums and the VMFA. How does the university's collection intersect with the VMFA's collection?
I can go first. I think, you know, we work a lot with a collector at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts, and so he lends us a lot of pieces to put in our collections, and sometimes gives us, you know, gifts as to, you know, have in our collections. So there is this kind of, you know, integrated work of art from, you know, not just local artists from Virginia or other printmakers, but there is like a wider, you know, range of work that we are able to have in our exhibitions. And so it really kind of opens up that, you know, sphere and allows us to kind of reach to more areas of Virginia, if that makes sense.
Anybody else want to add to that?
I think the collections part, absolutely, but I think also both Richard and Elizabeth are such good sort of ambassadors for university museums when it comes to communicating with the VMFA. So regardless of if the collection is similar, shared, if there are similar exhibitions going on, they make sure to really, bring us to VMFA and bring VMFA to us. So we're always in conversation with one another as institutions. And I think that really helps. Even if there's not an obvious collaboration, there's always something going on to where we're still, in the same Richmond art community, which is really great.
Okay, well, that was the only question that the audience has asked. So I guess I will just kind of wrap things up and just tell you all how lovely it is that you agreed to be here, and you are fantastic ambassadors for the University of Richmond Museums. I can't say how proud we are enough. You guys are awesome. And it makes me feel like a proud mom to see you guys all out there in the art world and supporting one another and just doing such great work. And, you're always welcome to come back and visit, and we will call on you to do things. So, watch out. And Hadley, you have a good team of people here that you can ask advice of and such. So I just want to thank you all for coming and being a part of this. It's really special.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been amazing to be kind of like, I think all of you came to New York, right? Or maybe Hadley, it was virtual, right? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had a
Yeah.
virtual discussion with you. Yeah.
Eventually you'll come to New York, we'll get coffee, but it's so awesome to be in conversation with, such a fantastic group. And Heather, thank you so much for the invitation.
Thank you, Heather.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.
Okay.